it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I graduated from high school a few years back. Still live with my parents, but I'm using this time to my advantage. They're kind enough not to charge rent, and that allows me the ability to save up almost every penny I make. The hope is that I can one day start a small, legitimate business and move into my own apartment. You know, the American dream. You see, much to my parents' dismay, I don't have a steady job. I prefer to take a DIY approach, be my own boss. I buy and resell things online and take odd jobs here and there to supplement my income. With the help of social media and Craigslist, I'm able to regularly mow lawns in spring and summer, rake leaves in autumn, and shovel driveways in winter. And eventually I'll make enough to buy a decent car and reach clients outside of town, maybe even hire a few lackeys. What I'm here to share with you, however, is an incident that occurred almost 2 years ago, one that keeps me on edge to this day. In my first year of business, I introduced a flower delivery service. Depending on the season, I either pick up flowers from around town or buy them from a local florist and deliver them to a person of my client's choosing. While it wasn't my most popular service, it did bring in some good money. I'm surprised how much folks are willing to pay to woo a loved one with flowers. And all the time that I bike flowers back and forth from person to person, I only ever picked up one regular. His name was Red, and he was absolutely infatuated with his girlfriend, Clara. Once a month, I'd deliver a dozen roses to the local hotel where she worked. No matter how many times I went over there with the same bouquet, she always acted surprised and delighted to know it. It really did have something special, and I was happy to be a part of their lives, in at least a small way. But then, February rolled round. Albeit my least popular job, we gained a little traction during the Valentine's season. Along with the additional customers, Fred goes all out and has me deliver 3 bouquets a week leading up to the holiday. Between these deliveries and keeping up with my usual services, February beats the hell out of me. Well, this particular Valentine's week was a little different. Getting close to the big day and I hadn't received a single order from Red. I usually don't get attached to my clients, but I was quite fond of Red and Clara. Because of this, I decided to reach out to him. Tried calling him, no dials. Nothing but dial tones and voicemail. I thought about riding over to the hotel to ask Clara about it. That would have cut into the rest of the work I had lined up for the day. With no viable options available to me, I simply went about my day and kept a positive mindset. Something felt off, but I was sure it was nothing to worry about. The next day, Rick called. He was fine, but something he wanted to discuss with me. The phone conversations I've ever had. This one tops the list for the most bizarre. Red hadn't ordered any flowers because he was getting ready to pop the question to Claire. He wanted the lack of gifts that week to leave her confused and catch her completely off guard on V-Day by asking for her hand in marriage. I was happy for him, but that's when the conversation took an unexpected turn. Red didn't have a ring. He was wealthy and could afford whatever jewelry he wanted, but just any engagement ring would suffice. He wanted his mother's ring. The one his father had proposed with. It was the only one he felt was fitting. The only one worthy enough to be wrapped around him. There was just one problem. His mother was buried with him. And then came the weird part. Red offered me $10,000 in cash to dig up his mother's grave and retrieve the ring from her dead finger. He said he'd do it himself, but he didn't have enough. He couldn't bring himself to defile her gravesite like that. He wasn't exactly comfortable with me doing it either, but he truly felt this was the only way he could propose to his one true love. I pleaded with the guy. He really did. I told him to go to Jared's. We were in love rings from Jared's, seriously. But alas, he wouldn't budge on that. It was the allure of money that I could use to expand my business, the desire to help out a desperate friend in need. Well, I grudgingly accepted the job. I'm not going to make any excuses here. I know you think I'm crazy for doing it. Yes, I certainly was. I know this now. I knew it then too, but have you ever looked back on something you did in your past and wondered, what the hell was I thinking? Well, this is one of those moments for me. Try as one might, you can't go back and change the stupid shit you've done. This is something I'll just have to live with. Under the light of a full moon, I biked over to the cemetery. As conspicuous as the shovel protruding from my backpack looked, I managed to make it the whole way, without any trouble. After passing the black entrance gates, I laid my bike down and set off on foot. The graveyard was consumed by a little winter chill and uneasy silence. My footsteps cut through the crisp night air, creating echoes that danced from headstone to headstone. I turned back from time to time, told myself it was to check for passing cars, but really I was afraid of ghosts lurking in the shadows. I never really believed in them, but being surrounded by hundreds of buried corpses in the middle of the night can do a number on your psyche. Growing more nervous with each passing moment, I trotted to the back of the cemetery in haste. My hurried pace was soon impeded by a fresh pile of white marble, on which was etched the name, Abigail, in a stunningly elegant font. This was it. This was Red's mother, right where he'd said she'd be. It was time to get down to business. In the hopes of saving at least a little bit of face, I'll say that, in this moment, what I was doing did feel deeply wrong on a moral level. I was about to vandalize and rob the grave of a deceased stranger. She didn't deserve this. I very well knew it. Would I live with myself knowing that I'd disturbed her peaceful slumber? Well, the question had a simple answer. With $10,000 in my pocket, and that's how. I'd come too far to turn back. I foolishly felt that this was the best way to further my financial endeavors. May God have mercy on my soul. The whole process only took about 6.5 hours, a little less time than I'd expected. I suppose shoveling driveways every year prepared me for this pivotal yet strange moment in my life. After all was said and done, I looked at the coffin below and panted profusely. Despite being utterly exhausted, I had no time to waste. Daylight was on its way and I had to get the hell out of Dodge before it shrouded the land of the dead. With how narrow the hole was, there's no way I would open the coffin by conventional means. Adding insult to injury for poor Abigail, I had to use my shovel to break through the confines of her deathbed. Eventually, it desecrated the entire cover, allowing me ample room to retrieve the ring, no matter which hand it was on. Victory was within reach. Before taking my prize, I looked down at the woman I was about to steal from. The sight of her corpse was a grotesque one. She'd only been buried for about a year, so her flesh had not fully decayed. So her skin might batter on an undercooked drumstick. To top it off, maggots crawled around every inch of her surface. It was sickening. Just as I was about to reach past the flesh-eating bugs and grab Abigail's hand, something crazy happened. It was dark, that's for sure, but I swear I saw her begin to sit up in her grave. The movement was sudden. It was enough for me to take notice. I was startled, but it took a few seconds for the gravity of the situation to sink in. When it did, I became so spooked that I hightailed it out of there without a second thought. And that is the gist of my late night adventure. Pretty lame, right? I went through all of the grief just to chicken out at the last minute. Pathetic, I know. But you weren't there to experience it. As I climbed out of the hole, I felt something brush against my hand. Perhaps Abigail's brittle hands attempting to pull me to my death. As I ran to my bike, I pictured her crawling up from her earthly tomb and chasing me down the road until I was inevitably captured. This was the single most frightening night of my life. I was scared shitless and I didn't give a flying fuck about Red or the $10,000. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Of course, upon arriving home, logic set in. I realized the error of my ways. It was entirely possible that Abigail was as still as stone, and I only thought I saw her move. What I fell against my ankle was probably more likely maggots crawling up my pant leg. I had let the eerie atmosphere of the cemetery get the better of me, and was now out 10 grand and a good friend. Just my goddamn luck. I almost went back, but the sun was beginning to rise. I couldn't risk being spotted and going to jail. That was a likely outcome regardless. Instead, I wallowed in self-pity and ignored Red's calls for a couple of days. Soon enough, my failed grave robbery was all over the news. But here's the thing. When the police discovered my handiwork, something was profoundly amiss. Abigail's casket was empty. There is an old dust-covered road on the outskirts of Bakersfield that leads to the long-forgotten town of Medina, California, where the demolished buildings line the shattered concrete, stretching past the frayed town site that used to house its name, where rusted windmills creep to life beneath unyielding winds. Many within the neighboring cities would attest that the town was never more than a vacuous ghost town, their recreant remarks roused by the grief-stricken tales passed down by their ancestors. Its forgotten memories forcibly buried below the rubble, battered skeletons of abandoned brick structures and stripped machines. For those who chose to acknowledge it, the bitter memory of lost souls are forever etched into their subconscious, and the horrendous past of Medina lives on. The town's downfall came at its peak, amidst the installation of its first streetcar. Those who could not afford to journey north to San Francisco opted to travel its bounded rails, drifting past horse-drawn buggies and cross-wing construction. The trolley's popularity grew with the wondering curiosity of the neighboring counties, soon becoming a bustling tourist attraction. But, as all good things do, its unbridled fruition soon came to an unrelenting end. On the 12th of April 1898, a series of fires ravaged the town, killing over 700 civilians. Poverty ravaged the land, and those who survived soon deemed the town cursed, eventually abandoning what little possessions they'd left for a new life elsewhere. The stench of burned flesh and terrified hounds still quiver along the chilled winds, leaving the souls of the damned behind, forging the town into a permanent afterlife. As a historiographer, I find myself often drawn to the enticing power of historical cities, and after learning of the buried treasures and desecrations it sent to home, I quickly opted to have a 14-hour trip to uncover its secrets myself. Despite my foreboding curiosity, the fear of the unknown left me a bit weird. I had no idea what sort of horrors awaited me, nor what breed of inhabitants I was sure to encounter. Word of drug peddlers and moonlighters occupying the area left a more sour taste than apple cider. Regardless, I pressed on, deducing that the risk was well worth the reward. Several hours into my trip, the paralyzing threat of fatigue soon swept over me, lowering my lids like sunken anchors over my eyes. The bounteous amount of coffee and energy drinks I got was beginning to. Nonetheless, I elected to continue against the lull of sleep, having already traveled the majority of the trip. Sleep would only deter my initial excitement. As I gulped down my last energy drink, I could see the faded town sign languidly creeping towards my vision. As I rounded the corner onto the dirt road, a chilling screech erupted through the air, and a blinding white light quickly followed, slicing through my eyes like wetting needles. As my arms tried desperately to cloak my eyes from the devil's light, the sound of screeching tires drilled into my ears. Before I could could regain control of the wheel. A thunderous jolt knocked me unconscious. A few hours later, I awoke, slung across an omnibus turn. My last memory being a dashboard view of the dirt road that led me. My shirt was shredded to rags, and dried blood caked between the seams. An obvious remnant of the scars that lined my forehead and cheeks. I had no recollection of how I ended up there, nor how far my 𝐁𝐎𝐒 state allowed me to travel. I fixed my eyes upon my surroundings, quickly taking notice of the noisy inhabitants I was once so aware of, none of which, resembling their dangerous counterparts, I was warned about before. Most were cloaked in bulging cotton garments reminiscent of Vietnam. Their children garbed in clothing more aged than their maturity. Either I had stumbled upon the sentimental West, or the new residents really strived to embody the town's rich history. I continued looking around, taking in the sights of old cathedrals and Victorian-styled architecture. It was truly marvelous. I was one of the very few who braved the trip to this seemingly dangerous and cursed city. I watched on as children played in the streets, while the adults conversed amongst each other, wondering why so many feared to travel. As I scanned my eyes over the area, a darkened shadow washed over, dimming my vision. I looked up, and the iconic streetcar was parked right in front of me. Its door was partially ajar. I was dumbfounded. How did this thing survive a fire from over 100 years ago? After closer inspection, its charged and discremate exterior suggested that the newfound squatters had been intelligent enough to get it running themselves. Despite my curiosity, I had no need to come aboard, at least not yet. I waved it away, stood erect, and sauntered off in the opposite direction. Ever since, the damn thing's been tailing me on and off for hours, like a starved puppy looking for an alms of sprinkled golf biscuits. I wasn't alarmed at first, but most vehicles restricted to rails couldn't partake in such behavior. As my curiosity swelled, I began keeping a mental note of its passengers each time it passed, causally cataloguing every man, woman and child aboard. There were never more than 3 to 5 passengers at any given time, and on most occasions none at all. Eventually I began counting the seconds it took to make its rounds. Approximately 30 minutes before making the forward cycle. A pretty short trip from the town. There was something very strange about this mysterious trip. Something that I was now hell-bent on finding. As it began to make its next round, I quickly ducked behind a buggy positioned against the side. I waited for it to pass, then immediately followed closely behind, careful of being spotted. It made multiple stops before rounding the corner into a blind alley. I abstained from proceeding any further, unsure if misplaced tracks led it astray. To my bemusement, it continued its advancements, seemingly unknowing of the approaching dead end. I braced myself for the impact, waiting to hear the grating sounds of sheet metal searing against the stolen surface. I waited, but heard nothing. Only the immobilizing embrace of silence greeted my doddering ears. I slowly regained my composure, scouring the area for any sign of the trouble. Not a puff of smoke, nor the shattered remains of metal sat where it once trailed. It was as if some magician had used it in an elaborate stage show. Without the continuous howls of electrically powered rails traversing overhead, I noticed how quiet the town had become. Only the low growl of street lamps interrupted its hushed activity. Something was on. Just a few hours ago, the streets were filled with life, and now it seemed like I was the only one left. Before I could jump to any conclusions, a low rumble resonated from the direction the streetcar had vanished in. Closer, oblivious to what might happen next. The rumbling grew louder and louder, before a familiar white light beamed into my retina. The sound of rotating cables pierced through the air. The iconic streetcar once again bestowed its presence. I watched as it pulled up beside me, its doors creaked open ever so slightly. I stared with a look of confusion. Why did it want me to come aboard so badly? I slowly ambled towards it, scaled the narrow steps, and stepped onto the soot-stained tile floor. I looked around carefully, examining each passenger, feeling the blood run colder with each glance. What sat aboard the trolley sent cold shivers down my spine. The passengers all stared blankly in my direction, their skin blotched with dried blood. Sickening blisters and deep lacerations riddled their bodies, some still excreting sanguinesque fluids. Gaping holes occupied areas of seared flesh, exposing fractured jaws and visible grey matter. The stench of decaying flesh forced vomit up my esophagus. I swallowed hard, turning towards the driver for any explanation for what I was witnessing. The sight of him left me in a cold sweat. I was even more terrified than I had been before. Beneath his ebony cloak lay the face of death. A luminescent red light glowed from within its sockets, while tiny maggots danced inside its skeletal orifices. I wasn't sure if this was real, or the town's version of a practical joke, but I wasn't planning on sticking around to find out. I turned towards the door, preparing to run, when I felt the icy grip of fleshless bone clash tightly around my wrist. I pulled back with incredible force, but I wasn't going to accept the fate of death so easily. I twirled around, connecting the sole of my foot with the side of his temple, then leaped from the trolley as he screamed out in pain. Before I could even get a running start, he lunged towards me, tackling me to the ground. He gripped so tightly onto my ankles and began pulling me back aboard the trolley. I tried desperately to loosen myself from his grip, but his brute strength undoubtedly surpassed mine. I couldn't allow myself to be dragged back onto the traveling nightmare. I had to do all I could to break free. I jolted violently beneath his run, digging my nails into the shattered concrete below. I could feel my ankles slipping in his hands. The moment I felt fingers retract, I shot up from the ground and darted in the opposite direction. I ran as fast as I could, creating as much distance as I could between us. What the hell was going on in this town? I tried to cook up a viable explanation, but all of my theories managed to conjure more questions than answers. I continued running, hoping to stumble upon my car on that dirt road, running for what seemed like hours before finally reaching it. When I arrived, the townspeople were all huddled together. Something or someone was holding them focused. I forced my way through the muttering crowd, curious as to what the hell that all was so entranced. dirt road came into view, an all too familiar sense of terror engulfed what little hope I had of ever escaping. My car was crashed into a large pile of rubble just beyond the town's entrance. My risky habit of rarely buckling my seatbelt forced my body to propel itself through the windshield. Broken shards of glass and a fractured spine would cause my demise. I walked closer towards the vehicle, staring at my exaggerated reflection with utter horror. My appearance would not differ much from those aboard the trolley. I turned slowly towards the others, watching their worried expression turn to those of rage. Their murmurs grew from quiet whispers to howling shrieks. I quickly covered my ears, trying desperately to shield them from their horrid cries. As their shrieks grew louder, a sea of flames erupted around us, engulfing the city in a reddish glow. As the flames drew near, one by one, the physical form of the townspeople slowly dispersed. Their battered souls behind them. A frozen look of dread crept onto my face as I watched their ethereal flesh catch fire, their screams burrowing deep into my subconscious. I now understood what that streetcar was for. And now, more than ever, I have regretted my decision of ever leaving it. It is said that Ufa, which lies beyond the river sky, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe as I gaze upon him who sitteth purring before the fire. For the cat is cryptic, and close to strange things which men cannot see. He is the soul of antique Egyptus, and bearer of tales from forgotten cities in Meroe and Orpheum. He is the kin of the jungles and woods, and heir to the secrets of Ori and sinister Africa. The Sphinx is his cousin, and he speaks her language. But he is more ancient than the Sphinx, and remembers that which she hath forgotten. In Ulthar, before ever the Burgesses forbade the killing of cats, there dwelt an old cotter and his wife, who delighted to trap and slay the cats of their neighbours. Why they did this, I know not, save that many hate the voice of the cat in the night, and take it ill that the cat should run stealthily about yards and gardens at twilight. But whatever the reason, this old man and woman took pleasure in trapping and slaying every cat which came near to their offering. And from some of the sounds heard after dark, many villagers fancied that the manner of slaying was exceedingly peculiar. But the villagers did not discuss such things with the old man and his wife, because of the habitual expression on the withered faces of the two. And because their cottage was so small and so darkly hidden under spreading oaks at the back of a neglected yard. In truth, much as the owners of cats hated these odd foes, they feared them more. And instead of berating them as brutal assassins, merely took care that no cherished egg or mouse should stray toward the remote hovels of the dark. When through some unavoidable oversight the cat was missed, and sounds heard after dark, the loser would lament or console himself by thanking fate. It was not one of his children who had thus vanished. For the people of Ulthar were simple, and knew not whence it is Cat's first kiss. One day, a caravan of strange wanderers from the south entered the narrow, cobbled streets of Ulthar. Dark wanderers they were, and, unlike the other roving folk, passed through the village twice every year. In the marketplace they told fortunes for silver, and bought gay beads from the merchants. What was the land of these wanderers, none could tell, but it was seen that they were given to strange prayers, and that they had painted on the sides of their wagons strange figures with human bodies, and the heads of cats, hawks, rams, and lions. And the leader of the caravan wore a headdress with 2 horns, and a curious disc betwixt the horns. There was, in this singular caravan, a little boy with no father or mother, but only a tiny black kitten to cherish. The plague had not been kind to him. It had left him this small, furry thing to mitigate his sorrow. And when one is very young, one can find great relief in the lively antics of a black kitten. So the boy, whom the dark people called Menace, smiled more often than he wept, as he sat playing with his graceful kitten on the steps of an oddly painted wagon. On the 3rd morning of the wanderer's stay in Ulthar, Menace could not find his kitten, and as he sobbed aloud in the marketplace, certain villagers told him of the old man and his brother, and of sounds heard in the night. And when he heard these things, his sobbing gave place to meditation, and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms toward the sun, and prayed in a tongue no villager could understand. Though, indeed, the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky, and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous figures of exotic things, hybrid creatures crowned with warm-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. That night the wanderers left Ulthar, and were never seen again. And the householders were troubled